We'll take a little look at the application before we get into the details of the coding, just to have an idea of exactly how the application works and to give us some background on how to code in WebSockets before we actually get into the Java code itself. So what we can see here is some JavaScript code that's going to manage the actual communication with the WebSocket. In fact, there are two JavaScript files here, chat.js and chatViewModel.js. Chat.js will give us the code that communicates via the WebSocket, and then chatViewModel.js is the code that takes the data and displays that data on the user interface and manages the interaction between the user and the user interface. So when the user clicks on a button, such as the join button or the send message button, then it's the chat view model that manages that interaction. When the application starts up, it creates an instance of chat view model, and this object calls a method here called initialize, and the initialize method is actually a method that ends up being called on chat.js. So the initialize method has to connect to the WebSocket at the appropriate endpoint using the appropriate protocol. So the initialize method checks to see which protocol we connected with originally, whether it was HTTP or not. If it's HTTP, we use the WS protocol. If it's not HTTP, we assume it's HTTPS, and we use the WSS protocol. The WebSocket also specifies the endpoint for the WebSocket communication, which in this case is /WebSocket/chat. So we create a URL using the WebSocket protocol and the name of the endpoint, and we pass that off to the connect method. And the connect method is here. So the connect method creates a WebSocket. So using a new WebSocket object, the WebSocket is built into the browser and then sets up several event handlers. So it sets up an onOpen handler, which is called back when the connection is opened, an onClose handler, which is called when the connection is closed, and an onMessage handler, which is called when any message is received from the server. And this is a really important part of WebSockets. WebSockets is very much a message-based protocol. So in a message-based protocol, the client and server send each other messages, and it's up to the application code to manage those messages, to understand the messages, and to do some processing based on the message it receives. The chat view model code has several functions that are wired into the user interface. In particular, the first one we'll take a look at is the join function. So the join function is called when the user clicks on the join button, so this button here, and passes in their name. So the join function just does some checking to make sure we're not already joined and checks we have a valid username, and then it takes the chat object that's been passed in, which is this chat.js file, and calls it send message, passing in a new join message. Join message looks like this. It has a message type, which is an ID, which is just set to 1, and then the name of the user that's joining. So that name is passed in here. So once we create a join message, we call the send message function on the chat object. And the job of that send message function, which is here, simply sends the message using the socket we created above to the server. And notice that to send the message, we use JSON.stringify to send the message as a JSON string.